Glad you could join the Q&A today with Innovators and hashtag Blackstein. I'm Gerard. Let's get inspired. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gerard Buckner at the Mortgage Institute for Research as part of the outreach team in the Discovery Building. Today, I'm with Professor Brian A. Burt from the Education Building on UW-Madison campus. So as you guys know, we are highlighting Black businesses and Black professionals on UW-Madison campus. We are delighted to have a conversation with Dr. Brian. Dr. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself and we'll get the conversation going?
Sure. Dr. Brian Burt, Assistant Professor of Higher Education at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Great to be here with you all.
Yeah, thank you. So we always like to start our conversation just kind of knowing the basics. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay. And what was the process of getting here to Madison?
Okay, so originally from Michigan, Midwest, of course, and then went to undergrad to study secondary English education at Indiana University. I actually started off as a music education major, but switched to English education. And then after my bachelor's degree, then I went to the University of Maryland at College Park for a master's in educational leadership and policy with a concentration in higher education. And after that, I stayed on campus and worked at the business school for a couple of years. And then after that, I decided, or during that full-time experience, I decided that I still was very intellectually curious and had things I wanted to learn. So I went to the University of Michigan for my PhD in higher education, finished that, and started my first faculty career at Iowa State University in the School of Education and Higher Education program. Stayed there for 5 years, and then I was recruited here to UW-Madison. And
wow,
the rest is history.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
How long have you been on campus?
I'm in my second year now.
Okay, cool. So still kind of freshly new. Well, welcome. Mm-hmm. You travel a lot, so it's cool to have you here. This is great. As a professor, obviously you are being affected by COVID-19. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are the effects for you? Whether it's good or bad, or how's it? What is the gist for, especially for a professor?
I think that's a good question. I think it's hard to disentangle because it's not just COVID going on, right? We've had a very crazy election circus. Mm-hmm. We have ongoing historical racism going on in addition to COVID. So it's like these multiple pandemics happening that are difficult. So it's somewhat difficult to disentangle just COVID, but in terms of my day-to-day work, that hasn't really changed as much because historically I've thrived working from home. Like that's where I'm able to do my research and focus and things of that nature. But what I have noticed is I'm working a lot more to some extent as a distraction, or before I was working more almost as a distraction, right? So if it was unsafe to go outside, I would stay home and I would just work more, which has been a challenge because it doesn't provide me the same balance that I had pre-COVID when I could get out the house or go see people and, just some things that I took for granted. So in terms of like how to navigate that or negotiate that, I mean, it's still work related, but it doesn't feel like I've been doing the work in isolation. And I'm very fortunate for the community that I have here at Wisconsin, but then also, virtually everywhere. But one thing that I did very early on is me and some of my graduate students, my doctoral students, we established weekly working or writing sessions. And to me, that was it was reminiscent of what we would have been doing if it wasn't COVID-19. We would have been meeting in person and having these working sessions, but having it virtually at least gave me some consistency and some positive things to look forward to. So I think that's just what I've tried to do is, maintain my same structure, but try to build in some positive things to go along with it to just, try to make it every day.
I really like the point that you pointed out, and something I haven't even thought about myself. But yeah, outside of COVID-19, yeah, there is so many other major events happening that we have to continue to work with, especially as being people in Black culture. And I kind of just want to touch on that. Like, how do you stay sane with all the different events happening, especially around, yeah, racism, COVID, and all the other things that you kind of mentioned?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, to be quite honest. And so I'll talk a little bit about racism. Uh, and I'll be honest. I think how I was raised or where I was raised, I didn't realize until I traveled to all those places and came back to the state of Michigan. I didn't know that where I was born was the conservative part of the state of Michigan. I didn't know that growing up. But I think now, knowing that, being older and having some more perspectives from living other places, I realized that how I was raised was to some extent have blinders on or to ignore things that might have happened. So as I've gotten older, some people, they react to different racist incidents or occurrences differently than how I have, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just, I've now learned that the way I cope sometimes is to ignore certain things. But I
Mhm.
think with the significant back to back occurrences, there was just no way to ignore it. So much so is like when I'm outside walking the dogs, at times there were concerns of, will I make it home? Right? Do I
Wow.
need to walk in the more well lit parts of my quote unquote safe neighborhood? Or do I always just need to be fearful? Even going out to Costco or, wherever I want to go shopping. I mean, I'm always constantly thinking about these things, and it's inescapable, even as much and for as many years as I guess practiced ignoring things.
Yeah.
This season is just, it's really difficult to do that.
Mhm.
So I think how I've at least been trying to work on it has, number one, I'm trying to do a better job at talking about it and releasing it and feeling like I have to just be tough and invincible, because that's just, I mean, we've seen from all the patterns of people being slaughtered. Um, you could just be living life and, these things can happen. And I know it could happen to me or anybody that looks like me. So I think releasing some of the pressure of trying to feel like I have to be perfect and understand all this stuff, and being able to talk about it now, that has really helped a little bit. There was something else I was going to mention as it relates to that, but I can't recall at the moment. Maybe
Well,
I'll remember again.
yeah, if it comes back, just interrupt, and we can just always go back to that. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and saying that. I really do appreciate it, and I definitely can say I relate. I've lived in Madison, Stone area most of my life, and I can say the same thing. Like you kind of just, I don't even think you even put blinders on it. You just don't notice it, especially as a youth. You're kind of conditioned to it, and then as you get older, or as you see history repeats itself, you really look back and you're like, oh wow, that's something I just completely looked through and didn't never gave it any type of attention.
Right.
So yeah, so you kind of talked about your research as well. Could you dive into more about of that? What have you researched, or what are you currently researching, and what what does that do on campus?
Right. So how I like to think about my work kind of broadly, I think a lot about how students achieve and how they're successful. And I don't necessarily define, I'm not the one who generally defines what success or achievement is. I allow students to define what that might be for themselves. And once I get a sense of what they are defining as success, I think about how they're doing it. And not only how they're doing it individually, but what are the supports that are helping them to achieve or make progress. And of that kind of work, I think a lot about Black men in engineering graduate programs, mainly because they're just very outnumbered um, across the board, across the country in this field of study in STEM. And while some people will learn or have in the past done a lot of thinking or writing about why Black men drop out, I don't generally take that approach. I'd like to think of more of an asset base of those who are thriving and surviving and striving. How are they doing it, right? So thinking of the success stories as a way of thinking about how can we replicate the conditions, the good conditions, the positive conditions that are helping them to be successful.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
And like for you, what does it mean to be Black doing that work?
You know what? I appreciate that question. This goes back to the racism question. So I'll put the racism question, how I'm dealing and navigating with racism, and what it means to me to be Black and do this work.
Mhm.
Something that has helped me kind of get through the ongoing racism, because again, it's not new, is the work that I do. I feel like I am telling, through my work, I'm telling stories of people who have long time felt like they didn't have a voice, or that people didn't appreciate their voice, or they thought that they were making up these stories or their experiences. So I feel like through my work, I'm able to give voice to these powerful individuals. So I think that that's in part what helps keep me going as it relates to the racism. Not I think, I know this is what helps keep me going through racism, ongoing racism. And I mean, this is what I'm passionate about with the work, is that I'm sharing people's stories and amplifying their voices.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And then you kind of, again, you kind of talked about this earlier, but re regarding your education history. But what was the kind of process of you getting here now? Like, did you know that you want to be a professor and tell the stories of Black and Brown people as a youth, or like what starting? I guess I would say from high school. Where did you really see yourself moving into a career, and how did that alter if it did?
Yeah. Huh. Well, that question is, I think, is always interesting because it allows somebody to reimagine the steps, right? Because
Mhm.
I think I have some steps that I think I've taken, but then I think my family members would say I've always been practicing for this role. So I do know, I've always known I wanted to be a teacher of some capacity, even at the age of 6. I used to play school uh, with my mom, my brother. My brother would be all my students. He would change voices, all types of things. My dad and my other family members, I come from a family of educators. So they would give me their old teacher workbooks and their old grade books, and I would get graduation booklets and go through and just randomly pick out names, and those would be the names of the students in my classroom. So I've been practicing and playing school for a long time. So I've always wanted to be an educator of some capacity. Um, it wasn't until my PhD though that I really committed to becoming a professor. Before that, I thought that I would be, like I said, a music teacher and then an English teacher at the high school level. But being in college and being a student leader and loving what happens at a college or university level, that's where the passion in higher education came. But then becoming curious about how people are navigating and negotiating and experiencing college, and just having question after question in my mind, that kind of led me to know that I wanted to be a professor, someone who, as a career, is thinking and reading and writing about what they are passionate about. So I guess just to sum that up, I've always known that I wanted to be in education, but it wasn't until my PhD where I had the license to ask questions, and asking questions wasn't a bad thing, but it was looked at as something to be cherished. And here at Wisconsin, I mean, it's a natural fit. I don't know if you're familiar with the whole Wisconsin idea, but that's what that's what it's about being here at Wisconsin, is to have good ideas and always be asking questions. So, this is a perfect fit for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I'm so glad that campus, because it really does display that there is a change happening. It may not be the fastest change, but there is a change happening. Being able to have those professionals on campus that look like myself, and be able to feel a little bit more comfortable. Definitely can expand further, but it's a start. So thank you again and welcome. What advice do you have for the younger generation you may have inspired today?
Hmm. There were a couple things, and I think they may relate to what I said, and some of this again is related just to my experience. I think sometimes people think of the word as play as a negative thing, but almost as I just mentioned, I played school, right? I,
Mhm.
and let's use the word play as synonymous with practice. I practiced um, becoming a teacher. That was practice, although I was playing. Um, youth and young people and, anybody that has a dream, I encourage them to play, right? And practice what it is that they think that they might be. So I have some research out there about some parents who may chastise their kids for playing video games. There's nothing wrong with video games, but it's very easy. Well, I don't want to say easy, but one way to kind of take it further is not just to let it be about playing video games, but make it about STEM, make it about angles and math and the science and the technology within that game, right? So then students are still playing, but they also are practicing some of the fundamental elements that could prepare them for a STEM career, if that's what they want to do, right? Or I know even for myself and my niece and nephew, I remember, or my nephew in particular, there were times when he would just be so good at being argumentative. And I had to catch myself and say, although it's irritating, how might he be practicing for a career in litigation or debate or some type of other profession where he can channel that thirst for conversation and discussion, right? Mm-hmm. But it took me some time to be patient to see what patterns I was seeing in him, to think that maybe this is his form of playing or practicing for something down the road. So whether it be like students or kids or parents, I want to kind of just promote that word of play, right? And not thinking of play as something bad, but thinking of play as practice for the future.
Wow, you just dropped a gem. Thank you. That was great. I have to think about that myself when anytime you really have a conversation with anybody, whether if it's positive or negative, and being able to take that conversation or whatever action you have with somebody and be like, how can we make this benefit you, really, right? Because you are doing that play, and that play could definitely benefit you in the future. So thank you for that.
To some extent, I think exactly what you said. To some extent, I think of it as tapping into what someone's existing skills already are, right? And leveraging their existing skills and helping them perhaps to see what that skill could be developed into, or the different pathways that existing skill could be leveraged into.
Absolutely. Cool. Did you have anything else for us today? Any other gems you got for us? Or I remember earlier you said you had forgot something that you wanted to dive into. Did that ever come back up?
Yeah, that was more just about how I deal with racism, and that was just to do the work that I'm passionate about, and not things that, by just doing the things that I'm passionate about, that's what keeps me getting up and going every day.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. Well, something I forgot to mention earlier, audience. If you'd like to dive into this conversation and kind of touch base, ask questions, just kind of have a conversation, please use social media and use the hashtag #STEAM Innovators. We would love to see your thoughts on what you guys have to say about this conversation. And as well, if you have any questions, hopefully we can touch base with Dr. Burt and be able to answer those questions regarding around race or education system and all those different things. Dr. Burt, anything else that you want to drop on us today before we head out?
Nope. I appreciate the work that you all are doing, and I appreciate everybody who is listening to this conversation and the others that will follow.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. And as always, make sure you follow Discovery Building on Facebook and other platforms. And yeah, these conversations will keep coming.